The shooting of an unarmed African-American teenager in Ferguson, Missouri by a white police officer illuminates the racial divide that remains in this country. It's that same race problem that has at least one Supreme Court justice questioning the merits of recent decisions by the High Court. Frequent D.C. Breakdown contributor and constitutional law attorney with the Center for American Progress, Tisch Sussman, is in New York City. She's joining us via satellite. I'm so used to having you here. I'm ready to talk to you in the chair there, Emily. How you doing today?
Good. I would love to be in there with you. I'm sorry we have to do this by satellite, but we still get to talk.
Absolutely, and we get to talk about our favorite girl, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She has just come on with it, hasn't she?
She is really coming strong. She's been strong in her opinions. She's giving a lot of interviews, interestingly, which she has not done a ton of in the past, and she couldn't be more right. I think this really does illuminate the role of the courts, the role of officials. There's a surge going on. We all know it. We all feel it. Sadly, what happened in Ferguson, Missouri, of a white cop shooting an unarmed young black teenager, it's not that, it does happen in other parts of the country, and it happens more than we like to acknowledge. Right. But the fact that this happened and the media attention that it was given and the social media attention that it was given and people going into the city, and this has become like a real wave. And I think the fact that her as a Supreme Court justice to come in and step in and say, look, this is terrible, this happens in our country, but we should take responsibility. We as the court should be taking responsibility. It's really quite remarkable.
It really is. I don't know what's going on with her, but for some reason, for someone who has been quiet for some time, she has really decided to take on this court and Chief Justice Roberts. And I loved, as I was doing a little research, I saw that the new RBG and John Roberts is Sotomayor and Alito. That there's a similar sort of tango dance that they do where, they sort of take on each other as, opponents in the decisions that they make. But a couple of cases that came out this year certainly are spotlighted by Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And of course, it is the Voting Rights Act, just gutting it, the pre-clearance portion of it, as well as the affirmative action decision.
Look, one of the things, going to another very strong woman that many of us admire, Hillary Clinton, when she was a senator, one of the things, I'm paraphrasing here a little bit, but one of her questions to Roberts that I often think of is that she said to him, what can you point to in your past where you have felt some variety of discrimination, non-privilege? What can you point to in your past that makes me feel like you will be understanding to plaintiffs that do not have power as they come forward? He couldn't name them. He just couldn't name them. And I think that we see this coming forward with many of the decisions, not just the decisions, but also the cases they choose to take up. Look, the Voting Rights Act was standing. That was not a case they had to take. The fact that they took a challenge to the Voting Rights Act and the way they ruled in it, saying that there is just not the same kind of institutional racism in the South that there has been in the past, and so we need to reconsider how we look at what voting laws impact minorities and suppressing the vote in minorities. The fact that they took that at all, I think, is a signal to where his head is.
Well, agreed. And the offense to say that there is no racism or racism doesn't exist the way it used to is so tone deaf on the part of the head of the Supreme Court that it's unconscionable, in my opinion.
And it really is. There does seem to be a little bit of I'd say a large disconnect, actually, with the laws that are being passed overwhelmingly in the South, though they're happening all over the country. They are voter suppression laws. They are laws to suppress the vote.
Right, and Emily,
voter ID.
And Emily, let's be clear about this. The minute that decision came out, that was Shelby County versus Holder. The minute that decision came out where these states in the Deep South no longer had to get pre-clearance from the federal government to make any changes to voting rights, to how they're redistricting, the minute that law was passed, the minute the Supreme Court came down with that decision, places in the South, they started enacting all sorts of restrictions on voters.
Oh, they were off to the races. They were doing it before. We've seen a record number of voter suppression laws, and they were going nuts afterward. Look, it's everything from increasing voter IDs, limiting early voting time, canceling out the souls to the polls on Sundays, so making sure that Sunday before Election Day, people cannot vote. It is not a day that's open. It's really very clear what they're doing here, and past Supreme Court cases have shown us that the law itself, there doesn't have to be discrimination written into the law for it to be considered racist. It can actually be the disparate effect, although that is not what this court has been applying to these laws. So the reason that the state would be able to pass laws like this, this is how it would be considered constitutional, is if they have a real interest. What the state is saying their interest is keeping the voting clean, right? Like keeping out voter fraud. But study again shows us that voter fraud is so minor.
Right.
It's basically non-existent.
Exactly.
So at what point do you say if the state does not have the interest of voter fraud, these laws are just plain discriminatory?
Let me quote our friend Justice Ginsburg talking about this specific case. Quote, throwing out pre-clearance when it has worked and is continuing to work to stop discriminatory changes is like throwing away your umbrella in a rainstorm because you're not getting wet. I mean, love it. And so true.
She comes out with some real
doozies. I love it.
That is really a good one. I mean, the place that I will give the court a little bit of credit here is that they say that if Congress can come forward and come up with a new formula for how the states are being discriminatory, then they will consider a new formula constitutional. So I will give them the slightest amount of credit there and say that the door is open. And there was something of a bipartisan fix going on, interestingly, that Eric Cantor was working on. Unfortunately, with his loss, that is a piece that does not seem to be moving forward. And the way that Congress is represented right now, which is so gerrymandered, meaning that people are only that the representatives in Congress are only representing like-minded people just like them. They basically get to choose who votes for them.
Yes.
It is so gerrymandered that it is extremely difficult to see Congress actually moving forward in a meaningful way on a Voting Rights Act fix.
I want to get back to the whole race issue because Justice Ginsburg said something very illuminating, and what she was doing, she was comparing what the Supreme Court has done with respect to LGBT rights and that community versus what they've done with respect to race. And here's the quote: once gay people began to say who they were, you found that it was your next door neighbor, or it could be your child, and we found we admired people we admired, she said. That understanding still does not exist with race. You still have separation of neighborhoods where the races are not mixed. It's the familiarity with people who are gay that still does not exist for race and will remain that way for a long time as long as where we live remains divided.
Absolutely. There is a very interesting comparison here when we look at the two. I've worked in LGBT rights before and moved legislation forward. And one of the things when you talk to people about their change in attitudes is that they already know the person. It could be their son, their daughter, their cousin, their neighbor, but they already have a relationship with them where they understand them as people before they come to understand that they're LGBT.
Right.
This is not the case with race for obvious reasons. You can always see that somebody may be of a same race or different race. And as we look at the census, this information and some analysis has begun from the last census. What we see is that although we are traditionally, the U.S. is a melting pot, we do have racial and ethnic diversity the way that other countries do not, we're actually very segregated by neighborhood and by county. Yeah. One of the things that we did see is that every county that is majority African American, so every single one of those counties, 96 counties in the U.S., are actually all in the South. So there is a lot of political power there. There is a lot of untapped power. If we go in and say, not only do we want representatives that look like us, but we're going to hold all of our representatives accountable.
All right.
We will not stand for the fact that these legislatures are passing law after law after law to suppress the vote.
Emily.
Look,
Tisch Sussman, I'm getting ready to lose my window with you, which is just breaking my heart. Constitutional attorney with the Center for American Progress, and my buddy. Good to have you on to talk more about an amazing Supreme Court Justice, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. You're an amazing woman yourself. See you back here soon.
Anytime, Angie.
All right. Up next, providing mothers and daughters with life-saving information about reproductive health. We'll be right back.